Indeed, we all have the right to be treated fairly, with respect, and to be free from unwelcome discrimination. Harmonious race relations depend on the equal enjoyment of human rights by all, regardless of ethnic or national origins or skin color. Harmonious race relations refers to the ways in which people who are ethnically diverse positively interact with one another. I would now like to welcome Mr. Meng Foon, Race Relations Commissioner at Human Rights Commission, to come forward to say a few words.
Did you see my name on the list? I'm not the person on the list. Hoia no tuatahi tata tēnā koe. Tēnā koe mō mi whakatau kia tātou ka whakawhai tinei ke rori te tāhuhu o tō iwi, o tō hapu, koutou manaaki tia ki a mātou o te rānei. Me ki o karakia he whakapaipai tātou e noho pai, kei wainga ki te hapai tēnei kaupapa whakaharahara nei rā te mihi. Koia no huri rauna ki a tātou. Assalamu alaikum, Ramarama Mubarak, Talofa Malolalei, bonjour, namaste, kia ora lux, good to see you. Chancellor, thank you, Roy, for hosting us along with Tony and your team here. Awesome to be with you. Awesome to be with you. In actual fact, I've been to a few Iftar hosted by the Pearl of Islands Foundation, and just want to acknowledge Shahib and Yasin for the generous hospitality. Because what an your worship. One of the most important persons in the world here. Your worship, thank you for the welcome to your wonderful city. I just want to acknowledge the passing of previous Mayor Dave Cole, President of Local Government New Zealand, a fine colleague, a fine gentleman who was very passionate about growing not only Dunedin's local politics, but also the infrastructure and well-being and communities of Aotearoa. So I just want to acknowledge that. And all those other people, all those other people that have passed on. Just want to acknowledge two colleagues from Gisborne, Greg and Hilda. They used to operate the Methodist Church, or one of the churches in Gisborne. It was the Methodist, wasn't it? Yeah. And she's coming to Gisborne soon, not to live, but for a holiday. One of the interesting things in my job, and has been described as harmonious communities, but what is it? And harmonious communities actually, in my mind, is a call to action and is about activation. And when I was in London, I got the call for this job, and I was thinking, you know, things can get pretty complicated, because I see a lot of professors here. You need to write a lot of words for your theses, right? But for everyday people, the message needs to be simple. And I was reading during the Irish Republic Army attacks in London, in England, 3 S's. See it, say it, and the police will sort it. Okay, so if you see something that's happening, say something about it, don't keep it within yourself, but also report it to the police or to the authorities, and they will fix it. And I said, I could actually come up with something, and I should come up with 3 A's. And my 3 A's is about awareness. So us being here today in Iftar, gathered from the many cultures and diversities, and don't stereotype because we're not all the same, and don't think that we're all, even though we live in Dunedin, that we all drink Spates or something like that. Terrible thing, but I know that Cadbury's here. Or you roll the pebbles down the Jaffas. That's not the Aucklanders down the road either. And so it's not to stereotype, but awareness. Awareness like today, and awareness and activation. Purposely saying that we are going to do this and collaborate in doing this, and purposely sending invitations to influencers in the Otago community to come here at the Otago University to be aware, to celebrate, to listen to the different voices. Because when we listen to our prayer from our brother in Arabic, you would notice that what did the Māoris actually hear when James Cook came here? He actually had tupaia on the ship. Why didn't he actually allow tupaia of Tahitian heritage to actually land with them and maybe not shoot 9 people on those few days? And it would have been a different Aotearoa. So, the interesting thing is, like, we have cultural differences. I remember when I was at school and the teacher said, bring a plate. So I said, oh, yes, we've got plenty of plates at home. And we've got dragons on our plates too. And so I went home and said to Mum, look, we need to bring a plate to school. And so I brought a plate, but my plate didn't have anything on it other than scrolls of dragons and gold designs on it. And I found out very quickly that a plate means actually bring something on it. In actual fact, in Chinese culture, you don't go to somebody's place empty-handed. I'd rather not actually turn up at the door. I have to go to the dairy or the supermarket to get something. Some fruit, some biscuits, take them along to our guests, our hosts. Interesting thing, you know, the teacher would say, look at me when I talk to you. And so you might have that frame of mind once upon a time, and then we'll go home. And my mother will be growling us, and we'll look at her, and then she'll say, what are you looking at? And so just those little cultural nuances of being aware that whenever I go to a Muslim organisation or Greek Muslim people, especially the women, it's always this now. I'm not going to chance it by holding up my hand and left this stranded, right? And yes, Asians do have a very weak handshake. Sometimes it's, oh man, it's like, is there anything there? Have you had enough rice for that night? But we don't actually shake hands, and generally we don't actually shake hands. It's usually like this, right? That's the culture. But suddenly shaking hands, okay, we'll just shake hands. And more particularly now, not in the last 5 years, for Māori women, there's not too much of that cheek-to-cheek thing. Cheek kiss is actually hongi, nose to nose. So if you ever meet a Māori woman, just go directly for the nose. Don't worry about the side thing, because they actually guide you. They actually guide you. So just be aware of these nuances of culture. The other thing is affirmation. The reason why we have affirmation is because we humans are not very good at steering the ship if we don't reaffirm things constantly. It's like the road code. Now and again we'll have to go and set the road code and reaffirm that at a certain age you have to go and get your glasses checked out or your eyes checked out, and that you need to actually set the road code. Or even in all of your professions, there are accreditations, there are tutorials, there are new learnings, changes in law, changes in situation, changes in environment, and having that affirmation is important. That's why we go to church. Often we'll go to the mosque or go to the temple. Often is to actually be reaffirmed with those messages so that we can continue to practice and believe in the aspects that we should be believing in. And so the last A is action. We can say that we are aware, we can say that we're going to affirm, but it is about the action. Action is everything. Even if you get it wrong. And I want to say to some people, the minority here, it's okay, because, you know, in New Zealand, Māori always says, oh, no whakwe, where are you from? How tō whakapapa, what's your family tree? And so it's okay, because we're trying to make a connection with you I know that some minority people says, oh, it's a damn nuisance that people are asking me, where are you from? Where are you really from? And, you know, all that sort of stuff. But it's really just to break the ice, because how else are we going to start conversation? And you can ask the same thing, and it's not, I just want to say, it's not offensive. It's just part of our culture that we are inquisitive people. We are really inquisitive people. And, you know, in the Tainawhiti, you know, in New Zealand, it's really just one degree of separation. I've met Hilda and Greg here today, and I've known Royden for a little while, and Lux and a few other people that are here. And, you know, if I get to know you a little bit better, I'll say, oh, yeah, do you know so-and-so that lives in Gisborne, or do you know so-and-so that lives in Wairau? It's really about that reciprocity, about the connections that we have, and it's about the familiarity. The more often you go into Parliament, the less to a submission committee, the less intimidated you will be. The more often you go to a mosque, a temple, a church, and be familiar with the cultural practices of those organisations, the less intimidated we would be. I went to the clock tower and I said, oh man, this looks grand. And just to acknowledge that the clock tower and other parts were actually built by the unfortunate prisoners of Taranaki Whānui, who actually were located here because, so the Crown can have their land. And so just want to acknowledge that. But what a grand place, and a lot of history in that. And I'm really supportive of teaching New Zealand history, right? It's about time that we learnt about ourselves. It's fine when we said, sir, did you know that Maui actually fished up the North Island? He said, how do you know that? And some of my friends used to say, well, how did the cow jump over the moon? And hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, you know? And so we all have our stories, and all stories should be acknowledged. My general thing about decolonisation, I'm very clear what decolonisation, I've worked it out in my mind, because decolonisation is a very toxic type subject for some. The pulling down, the changing, the deletion, no. Because we have a lot of Western history that is right up here, it is time to build the other history to be equal. Is bring equality back, rather than deleting this and not still doing anything about the local history of Aotearoa, and more particularly here. And just want to say, we Chinese people, just heard that we had Chinese Muslims back in the goldfields, 1860s, they came here with the politics, with the Hokianga Māori iwi of Te Roro, Te Rarawa and Te Mahurehure. They actually buried our ancestors in their urupa graves, because we had a concept of ukaipo as well, returning back to the homeland where our ancestors will be looked after by their families. However, they never made it. 499 sets of our ancestors actually ended up on the beaches of the Hokianga, and we have built 3 memorials there in the honour of having it on their land. Not only did they bury our ancestors, but our memorials are actually on that land. So that whakawhanaungatanga goes a long way. I was just thinking about the kuwata. The kuwata is a bird that actually flies from the Manukau heads, or the beaches of the Manukau harbour, and it goes 10,000 miles non-stop. Awesome, what a bird. Nothing to drink, maybe catch a few drops of rain on the way, but stops in the Yangtze basin, and then from there flies all the way to Alaska somewhere, and then from Alaska flies all the way back to the Manukau heads. What an awesome bird. And you know, in mythology or in stories that we tell, there is that reciprocity, that connection with people right throughout the whole world. And it is awesome that we have gathered here today, and let's continue this journey of reciprocity. Let's ensure that there is action in our country, positive, affirmative action, like Otago University, like the Pearls of the Island Foundation, that can come together, bring community leaders together to actually say that we are together. I would love to ask you that the majority race here support the minorities. It's important. And you've done that before when the wives probably elbowed their husbands, says, you make sure you vote in Parliament tomorrow to give us the vote. If it wasn't for the 100% majority of men in Parliament that voted for women to vote, you wouldn't be voting. And yet, but they were a bit cheeky. They said, no, you can vote, but you're not allowed to be in Parliament for another 30 years. And it's just like disabilities people. If it wasn't for the majority, you may not actually have the accessible accesses into buildings or into the workplace. So it takes the majority to support the minority. Don't worry, the reciprocity will come. The reciprocity will definitely come. And so I just want to acknowledge today what an awesome day that we're having together right here in the historical Otago University. I fully support Muriron Society. Again, it is the majority supporting the minority of Māori Pacific rural and refugees being in the medical profession. And so, kia kahara koutou, ka nuti mihi ki a koutou pōnei, a tāhua te kaupapa tātou ko whakawhai ki nei, ko te mea nui, ko te whakawhanaungatanga. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, Ramadan Mubarak.